Okay, kia ora koutou, kia ora tātou. Nau mai haere mai ki te whare matihiko o Dockage Schools. It's our great pleasure to share with you today the final session of Dockage Schools 2020 in this new post-COVID environment. We had shifted everything from theatres to online, so it's been a long journey, and you can probably hear I've got a little bit of a cold in my voice, so it's a good thing that we're online. But for this session, it is social justice shorts, which deals with several issues, but particularly issues of Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous rights. And we're very lucky to have with us here Gani Matata Sipu and Awatea Mita, and the discussion afterwards will be facilitated and moderated by Alicia Adar, who is the Dockage Schools coordinator, who's done such a fantastic job over the last 3 weeks. Thank you, Alicia. Ahead of that, I would like to thank the Ray Foundation, who have made Dockage Schools possible, and to all of the Dockage staff who have worked really, really hard. But yes, we're also looking forward to being joined by Dr. Carla Tate, who is a representative of the Winniston. I think I've got that right, and the Wet'suwet'en. Alicia will be able to help me with more with the pronunciation on that. But we're looking forward to having a conversation without a white guy putting his head in the middle of it all. Hi, kia ora, Ronel. Nice to have you with us here. Um, few tech housekeeping things. We hope everyone has signed up to be able to view the movie. There is a little bit of a sign up process, so if anybody is joining us here who is having trouble playing the link, let's test it now. So if you see in the chat room, schools.dockedge.nz film social justice shorts, just click on that and test it by pushing play. If you get a sign up message, please email either myself or Alicia right now. She's just put the email addresses in the chat. But aside from that, I'm going to duck out and leave the conversation to continue, and Alicia will guide you on when to start. So, kia ora koutou. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, well, I guess it'd be great if you two could maybe give a little intro for yourselves and your kaupapa, and then after that we'll have the viewing of the films, and then we'll come back and talk about what everyone thought of the films.
Ko te aroa te waka ko Nukutai Memeha, te waka ko Ngāti Parau, ko Ngāti Pikiao, ngā iwi. Ko Awatea Tuhuramita, tōku ingoa. So my name is Awatea. I'm from Te Aroa, Ngāti Pikiao and Ngāti Porou. I am associated to film through my mother, Merata Mita, who is the first Māori woman to write and direct a feature film solo. I am currently an honours student in criminology at University of Wellington, and I work part-time for Restorative Practices Aotearoa, which is the national body for the restorative justice facilitators and organisations throughout Aotearoa, which is an alternate form of justice for people who have experienced harm and who have caused harm. So that's me, thanks.
Kia ora Awatea. Tēnā koutou katoa ko Waikato, Te Waiohua, Ngāti Pikiao, me Ngāti Kukiarani, ngā iwi, no Ipumāpau ahau, ko Kiane tōku ingoa. So I am from Ipumāpau, and I have a couple of different kaupapa that I work across. I'm a journalist and photographer by trade, but I am also the founder and creator of Nuku, which is a social impact storytelling project amplifying the voices of 2,000 Indigenous Wahine doing things differently. And I am also the co-founder of the Protect Ipumāpau campaign, working to have our whenua returned in Ihimuata. So kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Should I go?
Yes.
I'll have a go. So, kia ora koutou. Ko Ngāti Maniapoto Rawa, ko Ngāti Whakaue, ngā iwi. I'm Alicia and I'm the Doc Edge Schools Coordinator. I'm very passionate about young folks and the education of young folks so that they can pursue their own self-determination and so that they can make conscious decisions on how they walk this earth and connect with this earth. So that's a little bit about me. I won't give you my full spiel, it's too long. But yeah, that's a bit about me. And then we're really grateful to have you both joining us and also Dr. Carla at the end. But let's get into it. Let's get into the film. So if you have your the link, click on the link that's on your other tab. And during the film, you can write notes. You can post comments in this chat box if you like. There are 3 of them, so I personally like to write notes. Yeah, and then once the credits start rolling, you'll hear my voice coming in to guide you all back to this page. So let's click on the tab, hover over your Play Now button, and press Play Now. And you might have to press it again. So we'll see you back here in a little bit. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed those films. I know they're some pretty heavy content, a lot to learn. I think that Renal, you and your class are learning a lot today, especially with our previous films. So yeah, we just wanted to check in with you, Dr. Carla, if you could give our students a little bit of an intro as to who you are and what you do. And then maybe if we could get an update on what's happening over there with the Unistoten people, that'd be great.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, great.
Hadi Denise Zakaize Skaize Psycarlatate Sydney. Witset Wakadiset. Gilse Yatsal Kas Wakadiset. So Denise Unistoten, Nedibis, Setso, Weli, Setsits, Tayu, Wigadam Skol, Senet, Geltai, Sabep, Rennie Tate, Sayet Bape, Melvin Joseph, Luxilia Habitzakozat. Hi, my name is Carla Tate. I am from the Wet'suwet'en First Nation, just dialing in here from my grandmother's home in Witset. I am from the Big Frog clan of the Dark House, and Unistoten is another name, or our Wet'suwet'en name for Dark House. And I follow my matrilineal line. We are matrilineal people. My house chief is Chief Nedibis, Blue Heron Man, and my hereditary chief, Whaley, is my grandmother, and my mother has the honor of earning the hereditary name Galtai, as does my aunt Frida Hewson, featured in the Invasion film, who is known in our feast hall as Howlcat, the one who digs. I belong to the Small Frog clan on my father's side. I have a clinical psychology PhD, and I am really honored to use this Western way of knowing to support the land-based healing work as a volunteer clinical director of programming at the Unistoten Healing Center, which is located on and draws on the full expanse of the wealth and the richness and the cultural resources on our unceded Unistoten territory, which many of you were able to witness through the beautiful shots on that film. I take it as a very deep honor to support the healing work of visitors to our territory. Much healing, I think we've enjoyed ourselves as a family in reconnecting and returning to those cultural practices and life ways that our ancestors have enjoyed since time immemorial. So I am currently supporting this work. We've received a grant from First Nations Health Authority to deliver programming for the next 2 years at our healing center, land-based healing programming. And we're still, I think, recovering and figuring out the next steps forward after a very eventful winter. We had a second standoff with the RCMP and this Coastal GasLink pipeline project. And this January had been arrested after a ceremony to honor missing murdered Indigenous women. Myself, along with 2 of our chiefs, my mother and Frida. So certainly the violence and the threats against us haven't stopped, but they haven't deterred us in our vision for what's needed for the health of our people and our land. Outsa, I can take any questions now.
Yeah, so we're interested to know, because you mentioned in an email that you were preparing to go out to the territory today. So yeah, interested to know where you're all at now, and also did anything happen with COVID with the RCMP, you know, kind of backing off a bit from the territory during that, or?
No, unfortunately,
Yeah.
as often happens in pandemics or these kinds of these crisis situations, is sometimes the governments, these colonial governments, take that as license to push forward with less checks and balances. So we've actually seen continued presence of RCMP on our territory. One of our bush cameras just caught footage of RCMP officer with an automatic rifle surveilling one of our smokehouses, a place where we prepare traditional foods like dried salmon. It's at the headwaters of Witsinqua. So they haven't stepped down their presence. We did have to push back and state that, you know, that this type of disregard for safety practices is reminiscent of the neglect and the willful genocide of our people during the other pandemics, the smallpox eras, the TB era. Just acknowledging that, you know, the most treasured members of our community are our elders, and of course we know that those are the folks that are most vulnerable to COVID and the experience the most serious or life-threatening symptoms. So we've been engaging with the Environmental Assessment Office, who's the government body that's supposed to ensure that the proper surveys and measures are taken. And we've been going through that route to communicate the severity and the importance of proper practice of all of those public health safety orders. But unfortunately, the Canadian and like the federal and provincial government didn't see the need to stop operations on these industrial projects and actually deem them to be critical services or essential services. So we have been continuing to monitor their activities on our territory. We're preparing a archaeological assessment report with some esteemed archaeologists and other supports. I'm drafting a section of that report on the social impacts and the human impacts on our healing center programming in relation to this project, to use those channels. Basically, we use every channels we can to push back and assert our our interests for the territory.
Thanks, Dr. Carlo. I think Alicia's probably experiencing a little bit of a lag on her computer and connection. So I'd like to throw open to Awatea and Kiani to just reflect on is there any correlation that you can see between what the tribe is experiencing in Canada there and what some of the tribes are experiencing here in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
I guess, yeah, for me, the invasion still was really close to home, in particular through my living in Ihumātao and Aupapa Kāinga and having my direct involvement with stopping a development happening on our whenua. And so thinking about, watching that film and seeing how police respond to Indigenous communities, how there is a clash between Indigenous values and Western values, and how Western values are always seen as being prioritised. And so what Western values are, so in that instance, a pipeline is seen as not as important as actually sustaining that whenua, looking after that awa that feeds that community. And it's really important that there's a resurgence of Indigenous culture happening around the world. There is the revolution is happening. We've seen it in what's taking place globally around Black Lives Matter, around Indigenous people in Australia, on Turtle Island, in Hawaii, and here in Aotearoa, standing up for our rights and promoting those Indigenous values. And what we see in Western reporting is that there is climate change and there is all of these effects happening to our world that are as a consequence of us not looking after our natural resources. But Indigenous values are all about us looking after our natural resources. It's about us being in tune with our environment. It's about us using our Indigenous systems because they are the blueprint for living well. And so here in Aotearoa, we have, we're in the season of Matariki at the moment, and Matariki is part of the learnings of Maramataka, the Maramataka being the Māori lunar calendar. And how do we look at the tohu, the signs, the tohu o te rangi? So what stars are in the sky, what they signify, the tohu o te whenua, what trees are growing, what medicines are in our bush at this particular time of the year, and then tohu o te moana, what are our tides doing, what are the seafood, see it's only food, the fish. I just think about it as food. What are the fish doing? What are their patterns? And when we know and acknowledge all of these things, we as humans can actually live really well. We can live off our land. We don't rely on a system. We don't rely on having to work 5 days a week. We don't rely on getting water, here in Aotearoa, getting water from the Waikato awa, because if we were actually being kaitiaki and learning how to live sustainably and had things like food sovereignty and water sovereignty, then we would be able to do all of those things for ourselves. But it's often because we live in society where we value Western values and Western systems over Indigenous values and Indigenous systems that we end up in these situations. And so I could relate completely to the story of invasion. And I guess for us in Ihumātao, one of the things that we were lucky with, and especially here in Aotearoa, is that currently we don't have police that walk around with rifles. And where Dr. Tate is from, that is a reality. And so we have had our own issues with being evicted off our whenua, and with police coming in, having a confrontation with those that are trying to protect the land and stop development. But there are also areas where we're quite lucky in the sense that we don't have that extra level of armed police standoffs. My initial whakaaro. sorry, there were two other things that I actually made note of in the invasion film. One of them was the fact that the council rid themselves, or the governing body, the councils, rid themselves of responsibility and move it over to the industry. And it's very much what happened here in Aotearoa, that the council and the government who made the decision to make the Whenua Irihu Mātau a special housing area, when there's an issue or when something comes up where the people of the land say, no, that's not what we want for our whenua, the councils and the government say, oh, it's not our fault, don't talk to us, go and talk to the industry, go and talk to the developers. And it's it's an interesting thing that these governing bodies that follow the system of colonization just don't want to take responsibility for any of their decisions, but they want to take all the credit when it goes the other way. And I was really taken aback by the point in the film where the representatives of the pipeline came to ask permission to come onto the whenua or to come onto your land, and brought water and tobacco as an offering. And it took me right back to when our people were colonized and were given blankets and muskets. And it was just a really, it gave me some feelings in here, seeing that they thought that exchange was okay.
Apparently they were counseled on that being a culturally safe or appropriate with what's there come with gifts, and that water and tobacco were appropriate gifts. Meanwhile, we have a pristine river flowing through there that we drink straight from. So it was sort of a insulting, comedic, disturbing situation. So I think Frida handled it beautifully. But yeah, it's absolutely speaking to the fact that, there are these empty gestures we continuously experience, empty words from the colonizers that suggest they're looking to build relationship or right relationships with us, and none of it is genuine and actually rooted in nation to nation respect. So this film starts to introduce the fact that we are leaning into our Indigenous sovereignty. We have strong Wet'suwet'en law that we've practiced since time immemorial, that we continue to practice through our feast hall, which is our governance system, and all of our hereditary chiefs continue to caretake over their territories. So thank you for those comments. I know it's very much a shared experience for Indigenous communities to see this kind of invasion and these kinds of this kind of violence brought to our lands and our people.
What are your thoughts there, Awatea? You've seen the films. Do you see any correlation between what's happening in Canada and what's happening here?
Definitely, and I think it's important to remember that these what's happened at Ihu Mātau, at Bastion Point, in Uniswara with the Wet'suwet'en people isn't what the common thread is as to why we can relate to each other's struggles, and that is because of centuries of embedded colonial practices. So out of the European belief of having superiority to Indigenous people came like the slave trade and this idea that Indigenous people can't govern themselves. So in that documentary, you see that they're standing up for their rights as Indigenous people to protect their land, to protect their culture, and to exercise their sovereignty. And so it takes today we're seeing the effects of colonial practices, and through globalization, Indigenous people and Black Lives Matter movement are able to see how these movements are connected, and that our resistance also has a whakapapa, that our ancestors, the people who have gone before us, have also stood up in resistance on these issues. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that history.
Yeah, totally agreed. This is a question for all. Like how do we get to a better place where Indigenous land rights and sovereignty are respected by government and corporate interests?
You recognize our laws. It's simple, and we do have the Supreme Court of Canada court ruling through Delgamuukw Gisdewe that established we have unceded territory, and we are a sovereign nation that predates Canada, and so our governance system needs to be considered and accounted for and respected, right? There needs to be some bridging between those two systems to figure out how do we coexist if settlers wish to remain here and do actually want to establish peaceful, respectful relationships, which we hear from Prime Minister after Prime Minister. So it's about, recognizing and respecting our systems and learning from one another. I love that comment earlier about the fact that we're attuned to our lands and everything that sustained us. We had ecological societies, and our laws are based on those values of sustainability, of living in right relations with the land that gives life, that defines us. So I think these colonial systems have everything to learn from our systems that allowed us to survive and thrive for hundreds of years before they arrive, for thousands of years. So, we see this rapid decline in the 150 years of our ecological ecosystems. And it can only speak to the fact that this governance system of extraction and capitalism is flawed, and it's going to lead to all of our extinction if we don't correct our course.
You talked a little bit about partnership. What does partnership actually look like? We need really innovative approaches moving forward, because everything that we've seen so far isn't working. We know it's not working because we're still in these situations. So what innovative ideas and different ways of doing things will allow us to move forward in a more positive way? And, thinking a lot about in Aotearoa, we have a treaty settlement process where iwi settle their grievances, but you can't, the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the partnership that Māori, Indigenous people of Aotearoa, have with the settlers that came here was never meant to be settled. It was meant to be honoured. So how do we honour that treaty? How do we honour that by not just looking at equality but equity? Because there's been so much oppression in this country. How do we bring people up to meet the standard instead of trying to give everybody an equal place when people are still all the way down here? We really need to look at, I was really happy that Rangi Mātāmua won a Prime Minister's Science Award this week, because what that meant is that Indigenous knowledge is recognised as a science. We already knew that, but from a Western view, Western science takes precedence over Indigenous knowledge. And this week, we see that Indigenous knowledge is being honoured and recognised as important. And so things like that, while they may seem superficial and sometimes they may be questioned as to whether or not they're done as tokenism or, whatever. I don't want to say that about Matarangi, because it was absolutely amazing. But little things like that help to normalise Indigenous values and thinking, which helps to bridge the gap and bring our communities to a place where we can actually move forward together. And I think there also needs to be this huge, I want to say slam in the face. I don't know another way to say it. This change of fear mongering that if Indigenous people get rights, or if Indigenous people suddenly are able to manage their lands, or if Indigenous people have their own laws, that it's going to be horrible for everybody else. And what we see in Aotearoa actually is that when Pākehā own or non-Māori own beachfront property, that beachfront property actually becomes private, inaccessible land. But when Māori own beachfront property, not only is it accessible, but it's being looked after. It's got great management plans associated with it. There are systems in place like Rahui that help either generate more fish stock or, you know, recognize cultural values on those particular places. And so I think there's lots to do, but we need to actually stop, listen, be innovative, stop being scared, and really take some fresh approaches. And it's going to take some really bold leaders to do that, because I still don't think, while the leadership we have at the moment is, in my opinion, is probably better than the last lot of leadership, it's still not bold enough, still not good enough, and it's still not taking our people to where they need to be. My 5 cents worth.
Yeah, I'd support that too. Dr. Kalate, I know that you're on battery and data at the moment because you've had a power cut there. What would you like to add in terms of your hopes for how things might progress? Like, is there a groundswell of public support, or is it mostly a media blackout? How is the general public interacting with this issue for you?
I've seen a lot of really positive gains with each stride. Hopefully this is an annual, a new annual tradition of getting Wet'suwet'en people on the front lines arrested. But I certainly noticed an explosion of support this year after myself and my matriarchs were taken into custody, and the treatment of us was far improved. Of course, you know, it's still abhorrent that we're getting removed by force from our territory, that these heavily armed members of the state are coming in and feel that they have a right to act as mercenaries for private industry. But I think we're at this time in the world with, you know, knowledge and information and sharing of experiences being so accessible at our fingertips, and unfiltered avenues for getting information about what's happening in the world, right? Because we know that media and the other structures that support the current societies we live in seek to center that Western perspective, right? And that narrative of the dominant. So we've never received fair media coverage, but through collaboration with strong and beautiful and talented allies, you know, productions like Invasion were created that really share our struggle for the world and really build up the support and the others' confidence or awareness to use their voices to elevate ours. So I think that's a really hopeful thing. We've received outpourings of support for legal funds to battle this in the courts, or to use as we deem fit to, you know, strengthen our presence and our programming on our territory. You know, ultimately, I think we'll continue to resist as we have for the past 150 years. We'll continue to exist and practice the things that make us Wet'suwet'en, which with each generation, I see us getting stronger in that. You know, my daughter is learning songs that I only learned in adulthood. So I think, you know, all of these are indicators that we're headed in the right direction, and that the rest of society is starting to see that this current, so it's a collective effort to make it right.
Fantastic. We're getting close to time. but I'd love to hear from all of the participants here. What advice would you have to young people who are learning about these issues, which have mostly been concealed from constructive public discussion, and it's mostly been slanted towards the favour of government, police, colonial and corporate interests? What advice would you have to young people who would put themselves at odds with their society, with mainstream society, and stand up for land rights and for sovereignty, Indigenous sovereignty?
I've been speaking so much. I
I'm
want
going to let someone else go first.
How about you go, Awatia, because we haven't heard so
Yeah.
much from you.
Okay, kia ora. So I sort of want to go back to your previous question, Matthew, when you asked, what can we do for change? And I like for us to look at that in a different way. When I think about it, Indigenous people have not, ever since the colonization came to their lands, they have not stopped resisting that. We have always been taking action to protect and care for our environment and to protect our cultural rights and exercise our sovereignty. And what Dr. Tate gave a great example about what allies can do. And I think that's sort of a better way to frame the question, because for us, change has come under a police baton, at the tip of a gun, under a judge's gavel. Our people come under tremendous strain to enact change within our communities, because it's a fight, it's a struggle. And so what I want to, how I would reframe that question is what is it that allies can do to ensure that Indigenous voices are heard? What can they do to be a part of change, to be a part of the solution? Because it is not enough to say, oh, well, I agree that Indigenous people should have their rights, and then do nothing. So I don't feel like it's my place to define for allies how they do that, and it's not my place to educate them, because I have enough on my plate with my own people, as well as bearing the brunt of these embedded colonial practices and criminal justice and land rights and health, all these iniquities that we're dealing with as communities. We have our hands full with that. So if our allies can look at their situation, listen to our voices, and then determine what courses of action they can take to amplify our voices and to advance our struggles, then that's what I would recommend for young people to do. And I just want to add, I am so encouraged by young people of today. I see so much leadership in younger people. You look at Black Lives Matter, you look at environmental issues. Young people want to have a better future that does embrace equality and equity. And so I have a lot of faith that we will continue to, as the different situations evolve, that we'll keep coming together and we'll keep finding solutions, and that as things change, so will our aspirations and our strategies. And that's the point of it, I think, that we can continue to work together. And if they could remove some of that emotional toil and determine our allies, what are the best actions that they can take. Kia ora.
100% tautoko that kōrero. And I think one of the parts of your question, Matthew, that kind of made me think was you said, sorry, I can't remember exactly what it was, but something like go against the normal, or do something and they might get criticized by their peers or by society. Actually, by standing up, we make the alternative the normal. That's what we want. The normal doesn't work. The normal is not working. So we need to make the alternative the normal. And the only way for us to do that is to continue doing the alternative until it becomes the normal. And the more of us that do that, the better. The other thing, especially with rangatahi, with young people, social media is so huge. And Dr. Tate, I think we may have lost her, but she talked about mainstream media not picking up on stories or preferencing someone else's view over the Indigenous story. And the power of social media is that we get to tell our own stories, and we get to tell them how we want, when we want, to as many people as we can. And I think that's really powerful in us ensuring that we keep our narrative the driving force, the correct part of the story. And if we build up our social media platforms enough, not our personal social media platforms, based around kaupapa, if we build those up enough, we actually can ensure that right narratives are being sent out into the world, and people are getting their news straight from the source and not from mainstream media. For young people that are wanting to learn more about these issues, I would encourage them to learn about media, but to also be very, very clear what information they're absorbing, they're reading, and know a little bit more about where the information's come from. Because even though Donald Trump has coined the term fake news, there is a lot of fake news out there, and a lot of conspiracy theories, and a lot of all these different things. I think it's really hard to judge what's the right information to look for. I think if you just try and go to the source, so for the Wet'suwet'en people, I'm actually not sure if they do have social media pages. I'm pretty sure they will. On the second film that was played around missing and murdered Indigenous women, there is a missing and murdered Indigenous woman Facebook page, and I would encourage people to just go straight to that source. There's a Protect Te Humapa one. There are all these different ones where we can get involved in the kōrero and hear it straight from the source, so that we're not hearing a watered down, slanted version that's come from media with headlines that are just there to either divide communities or sell papers. That's some of my advice, but definitely get involved. Don't be afraid to get involved. I think as young people, I remember when I was in high school, you didn't want to, there was sort of, you had to go to university, or you had to follow this particular pathway, or you had to do this certain thing. And actually, when you're an adult, you realize that's all a crock of shit. And, you do what's right. You do what's right for you, what's right for your whānau. Sometimes it's hard, but you do that because actually you only get to live once, and you want to live a life that's fulfilling for you, not fulfilling for somebody else's idea of what you're meant to be and do.
Well done.
Thank you.
Oh, good. You're still with us here, Dr.
No,
That's right.
I'm still here. Yeah, I really love those points, and you catching and picking that up. A lot of times this labor around educating about the history is put on Indigenous people, and we do have enough on our plate. We have that whole history of colonization that's contributed to huge inequities and social determinants of health and poverty and our own wellness. That's really what propelled me to pursue my clinical psych PhD. So, I think it's key that you do your own work and you find authentic sources of information to find out the whole truth behind a story before believing what you're told. You use whatever power you have to elevate stories of people who are disempowered by the oppression, and you take actions and make your own sacrifices, whether those be in interpersonal relationships with uncomfortable conversations, or whether it be giving of your time and your energy to help restore Indigenous peoples on their territory, right? To help protect their lands and help lend your efforts to these kinds of struggles. I do want to honor the fact that we've had a lot of settler allies. Frida, sadly, because of the situation that we're all in as a result of colonization, not everyone's healthy enough or in a place where they see land reclamation and practicing or resurgence of our traditional ways and our cultures as the way forward, right? There's still a lot of that internalized oppression that we're fighting against to really value our own teachings and value our land. So I know that it's been really helpful for others who haven't experienced the brunt of this toxic relationship to lend a hand, right? And there's been a lot of really beautiful people that are willing to be humble and take the space that's offered to them in those settings and take on the heavy lifting or the less glamorous roles to help out. And that's a really beautiful thing. I've made a lot of really lifelong connections and family that way. So I just want to recognize that kind of real respect and right relation is possible with folks that maybe have the baggage of the colonizer. But it's important for you to do some of that work first. So you can shed any white fragility, I guess, and get educated and feel comfortable to be in those difficult conversations and be willing to give up some of the power that folks take for granted. So I just really enjoyed sharing some space with you both today and all of your comments. I hope this film was educational. We certainly do have an Unisdaten webpage and social media pages that you can stay up to date on our struggle, and you can find ways to support. And please, get to know your local, whose land you're on, right? Get to know the local First Nations or Indigenous people where you live and reside, and really do what you can to honor those folks and get to know them.
Fantastic.
Awitsa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carla Tate. I'm also aware that Alicia has been having troubles with her computer and experiencing some lag. I'd hope that she'd been in more of a position to be asking the pertinent questions rather than me. But Alicia, is there anything that you'd like to offer to the conversation right now?
Yeah, I'm experiencing a lot of lag. I don't know if I'm interrupting you right now, but yeah, I found all of your kōrero really insightful, and this is what I love about documentary, because I think when we're talking about what we can do, you should tailor it to your learning style. And so for me, I'm not a person who learns by reading long texts and academic texts and things like that. But if I see a documentary and I can hear and I can feel, then that really pushes me forward. So I think, as an encouragement to students who are in school, I sucked at school, but especially with teachers asking me to read a chapter and then do the exercises. So I think if you can utilize what you've got, TikTok is really educational. TikTok is really educational. We've got a bunch of young up-and-coming documentarians on there, I think. So, yeah, I'd just like to encourage everyone to find a way that works for you to be able to contribute and engage, because it doesn't all look the same, and it shouldn't all look the same because we're all so different. So, yeah, and thank you everyone for your enlightenment and sharing your whakaaro with us. And also to you, Matt, for stepping in, helping out, and then, yeah, really being a boss.
Well, kia ora, Alicia. And a big thank you to you all. I think that's about as much time as we've got today. But mihi nui kia koutou, mihi aloha kia tātou katoa. Like to thank Ray Foundation again for making this possible, as well as all of the Dockage staff, as well as you, Awatea Kiani, and Dr. Carla Tate. So thank you very much again. That's it for Dockage Schools 2020. Really appreciate all of the tautoko, really appreciate all of the support. Keep on doing what you're doing, amazing stuff, inspiring stuff, and we'll continue to support where we can. Okay, ka kite everybody. We'll see you again soon.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Masai.